You're listening to Pitch Perfect, the podcast, not the movie. I'm your host, Nate, and joining me is my co-host, Josh, but you might know him better from his work as the tertiary mocap actor for the titular water horse in the 2007 film Water Horse, Legend of the Deep.
That's right, thank you so much. And, of course, my other podcast, Nate, has been described as the Hulk of movie podcasts. You know what they say? Don't let him watch Madagascar. You won't like him when he watches Madagascar.
Yeah, you wouldn't like me when I'm Madagascar watching.
And don't we have a guest with us as well this week?
Okay, so bad news on that one. I tried to keep him under lock and key, but I did make him watch Ernest Rides Again exactly once, and when I went to check on him, he had completely chewed through the door and busted out my window and escaped.
The whole door?
The whole door.
Great. Well, there goes our whole season 1 budget. We have to get a new door.
Yeah. So, I don't... He's in the wind. If you're out there, Zach, we love you, buddy. Please come back next season to watch some fucking Pauly Shore movies with us. But, the other problem with this is I did check with the Field and Game, and he is an invasive species in my area, so that's not great.
This is why we were keeping him locked up. Alright, you know what? He's on his own. He made his own decisions. Hopefully we'll see him again later. Sorry for all Zach fans out there. Anyway, let's get on with the show.
Yeah.
Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. The infamous hero is now the man of the hour. Ernest P. Worrell. A man called Worrell. To best be in a position to use his amazing powers in a never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way, Ernest has assumed the disguise of a simple, raving old coot with questionable ties to a nearby university. That's right, welcome to The Importance of Being Ernest, where my co-host and I talk about Ernest's incredible legacy and how things might have been different if our hero Jim Varney hadn't returned to his home planet so soon.
That's right. This is, of course, the first of hopefully many seasons of Pitch Perfect, the podcast, not the movie, where we pick a category of film, watch the films that are in that category, and then try to pitch the perfect one. So, if you listen through the entirety of this season, at the end, you will hear a guaranteed, scientifically accurate and certified, totally perfect pitch for an Ernest film. That's my guarantee.
I guarantee that as well, and it'll be amazing and worthwhile, and you'll be very glad that you listened to this podcast from start to finish.
And ideally, the Ernest film that we pitch will be quite different from the one we watched for this episode, which was, of course, Ernest Rides Again.
Yes, tell me, Nate, are your eyes bleeding as much as mine are right now?
My eyes aren't bleeding, but my heart is broken.
Same. Honestly, same.
And not just for the obvious reason that listeners of other episodes of this podcast would have guessed, i.e., the absence of our Lord and Savior Rimshot, but for other reasons as well, that we will get into through the course of this podcast.
Yeah, so Ernest Rides Again, why don't you give us a little old synopsis there, Nate? Tell us about this tragic story.
This Ernest Rides Again is for this podcast, The Empire Strikes Back of Ernest movies, but for Ernest is not that. Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm contractually obligated to say yes.
So, the gist of this movie is, Ernest is a janitor, I guess, maybe, it's not really made super clear in the course of the movie, for a university somewhere in America, presumably on the eastern seaboard, because he gets embroiled in an adventure with his kind of sort of friend, Professor Mellon, to find a lost Revolutionary War cannon called Goliath, which may or may not contain the true crown jewels of England. Along the way, they are pursued by an evil doctor / crime boss. They're also pursued by Dr. Mellon's Harrigan-esque wife, and also British secret agents. And then by the end of the movie, the crown jewels are recovered, and Ernest does not get to be the King of England.
No, he does not.
Lots of hijinks happen along the way, but really not... It's not quite as dense with hijinks as I think you would want it to be.
No, most of this movie is just Ernest riding on a cannon.
Mm-hmm. You know, every Ernest movie kind of has, like, the theme, right? Like, we got the camp movie, we got the Christmas movie, the jail/crime movie, and the horror movie. This is, I think, kind of supposed to be the Ernest adventure movie.
Yeah.
But it's not as strong a theme as the other ones have.
Well, the thing is, and we'll probably get into more of this when we rate the movie next, but it really tries to do too much and ends up doing nothing. Where it's trying to combine the adventure Indiana Jones movie with the international spy movie, with the there's a cannon in the middle of a road movie, and none of these click.
Yeah. I mean, a cannon in the middle of the road, obviously that's a well-loved genre in American cinema.
Mm-hmm.
Though I would say what's more happening there is they're kind of trying to do, like, a, almost like a silent movie-esque, like, giant central set piece. It's possibly a riff on The General, the Buster Keaton film, but I might be giving them way too much credit.
I'd say so, and I think it, like, to actually classify what I was referring to with better use of words, because my English is good, is like the Runaway Train movie. You know, like The General. The Denzel Washington is stuck in a train and needs to make it stop movie.
Yeah, though, man, can you imagine if this movie was directed, or really any Ernest movie, but I'm going to say this one specifically, can you imagine if it was directed by Tony Scott, R.I.P.?
Oh, man. That'd be amazing.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't know. That's also kind of blasphemous, right? Because, like, I'm taking food out of John R. Cherry III's mouth.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah. Do we want to rate this movie first before we get into the meat of talking about it?
Yeah, let's rate this movie. Would you care to go first on that, Nate?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, the worst one we've seen yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think, like, surprisingly, I think because of how hard we were on Saves Christmas, this is actually, I would say, notably worse than that movie. And I would have to give it, I mean, if we're going out of 5, 1.5 stars, I guess, what is that? That's, 3 if we're going out of 10?
Yeah, it's a 3 out of 10.
This is just mediocre and kind of pretty tedious and far and away the least funny of all the Ernest movies we've watched so far. And there are, as we'll get into the rest of the podcast, just other details that, like, kind of muck up the Ernest watching experience for me.
Oh, and for me, completely.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll take that lead into my review, which is mostly the same. Definite 3 out of 10, 1.5 out of 5. Ernest Rides Again is just a huge letdown. I mean, first and foremost, we'll get into this a lot, but they really flanderized Ernest into this raving lunatic, and he's not fun anymore. There are a few funny bits, but not enough. And the film's, like, barely held together. There are, like, some stuff that's, like, great in, like, a bubble. But, like, altogether, it's just not worth it.
No. So, like, Zach was talking a lot in the last episode about how he felt
R.I.P.
like... Yeah, R.I.P. Well, you know, he's MIA.
MIA, R.I.P., acronyms.
Yeah, he's all kinds of acronyms, that guy. There's one thing about that guy that I know, is that he's acronyms.
Mm-hmm.
But he was talking about how, like, he felt a sort of, like, weariness and a kind of over-it quality to Varney's performance in Scared Stupid. And you and I were both, like, not totally on the same page as him in that regard. But I totally felt it in this. And more than that, it felt like John Cherry was over it. This is, like, the most blandly directed of all of them.
For sure. It really just feels like they kind of keep going back to the same well and running out of ideas. And just like, fuck it, we gotta make a cash grab, and here's our cash grab movie.
There's, like, the central canon set piece, I guess, is, like, kind of ambitious.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, other than that, this movie is kind of a snooze.
For sure. And within that regard, it is worth noting that this was the last movie in the Ernest franchise to have a wide theatrical release. The next movie, Ernest Goes to School, which is teased in this movie for some reason, poorly, we'll get to that, was a limited theater release before it went mostly straight to DVD.
Okay, yeah. That also, right, the next one, well, I mean, we'll talk about it in the next episode, obviously. But I'm pretty sure School is the one that's not directed by John Cherry.
I would have to look that up to confirm.
So that'll at least be interesting. I have some thoughts about the teaser at the end of this, but I imagine we're not going to talk about that right now.
Oh, no. I think right now we should do our general flow and get into the, A and B plots, go over everything. Talking about, to start with, the start. Let's talk about what might be the best part of this movie, which is the opening credits.
But do we want to talk about the thing that comes before that?
Oh, you know what? I blacked that out of my mind. I guess we do have to talk about that. So, in perfect fashion, I think I'm going to try my hand at quoting the titular character of what we're about to talk about. Oh no!
Yeah, this one starts with, like a fucking Pixar movie. This one starts with a short. It's a Mr. Bill short, and a bad one. I kind of like Mr. Bill. This is not a good Mr. Bill.
Especially with modern lens on the topic at hand.
This was a very weird time to watch this one. I had a lot of that this week. I listened to a podcast where they were talking about The Stand, which is weird, and they're starting that Stand miniseries soon from where we're recording. And it's like, that's really weird in 2020. This is really weird in 2020. Because the premise is is Mr. Bill is elected president. That's it. And then the classic Mr. Bill structure, which is just that horrible things happen to him over and over again, often at the hands of various sluggos. There's really not much to say about this besides it's weird and it's not very good. But the big thing that stands out in this is there's one part where Sluggo Hussein, who is if you don't know Mr. Bill at all, he's like a little clay man. It's not claymation. He's just a clay doll that they just have bad stuff happen to him, and he goes, "Oh no!" That's the whole gist of it. And the Sluggos are other clay men. They're a little grumpy blue guy. This is a Sluggo dressed as Saddam Hussein who shows up and then dumps an entire barrel of crude oil onto Mr. Bill in the White House.
Yeah. That happens.
Then there's also the other notable part about this is there's at least one definite reference to the JFK assassination.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a part where he's trampled on the steps of the Capitol building, and one of the last things that runs over him is an old-timey baby carriage perambulator, which I think means that is a reference to either Battleship Potemkin or the Untouchables or both, which is strange to see in this context. And then it ends with him being surrounded by tanks and missile launchers and fighter jets and shit. There's gonna be a coup on President Mr. Bill?
Yeah, and at one point the Army General comes in to tell Bill about his budget for warfare items and accidentally dismembers him and the building and the Washington Monument with a laser pointer.
Yeah, he's gonna cut, it's a surreal narrative where he's gonna cut defense spending, and so in response he gets cut in half with a laser. And when he's about to be cut in half with a laser, he's like, "No, I won't cut defense spending." And it's this is grim.
It's a very pro-war Mr. Bill, which is... Whew.
Oh, wait, I just got it, I think. The joke is Mr. Bill Clinton, right?
Oh, dude, you didn't get that before?
I didn't put that together at all until just now, because I was blindsided by the whole ordeal.
Yeah, dude, especially with the time frame.
Yeah. So that's a weird way to start this movie.
Yes, but it can be immediately forgotten, thankfully, due to the next thing, which is the best, I will vouch for, Ernest opening yet.
Yeah. We were real down on this movie overall, but we've had a lot of discussion about the opening credits, and yeah, this is the best one, so far at least. Probably overall, going into the future, because honestly, I can't remember the opening credit sequences of any of the other ones.
Well, that's the thing. So, first off, this opening is once there was a man named Worrell, and it's just like once there was a man named Worrell, kind of like a thing, just like things that rhyme with Worrell, and it's great. It's very like moving and enjoyable. You see Ernest's picture put throughout history, like he's crossing the Delaware with George Washington and all this other stuff, and fighting Indians. Getting to the point about how it's good and not bad. I actually, when we were like previously watching Ernest films, this was like a highlight I remembered, and because I barely remembered anything about Ernest Rides Again because of how bad it is, I attributed this opening to a different Ernest movie. I thought this was from Ernest Goes to Africa.
I mean, I don't necessarily blame you for thinking that.
I was like, this opening's too good for how bad this Ernest movie is. I'm just gonna put it somewhere else.
But Ernest Goes to Africa is also not good.
No, it's not. But it's a better movie.
It's more ambitious, at least.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Again, that's something for future episodes to cover. So yeah.
Yeah.
Once Was a Man Named Worrell is pretty good, entertaining. I'd say probably the best part of this movie, which is not a good sign. And then we cut to Ernest. And what is Ernest doing?
I don't know. This is the most baffling and least relatable Ernest has been. He's doing the thing. He does at various parts of this movie. Honestly, not enough for it to like be a thing, but too much because it's not good. He does a take on the thing that he does in Scared Stupid, where he has all the different personas. But instead of being a performance for other people, like they are in that movie, he's just talking to himself in different voices, and they don't have the full costumes either, because this movie is lazy and cheap. So, some of them get like a new hat, but he's like walking around jabbering at himself, pretending to be Indiana Jones, and just like making a fucking mess of a construction site.
Yes, so he arrives at like this, they're building like an estate, and there's construction workers there who he refers to as Makita Warriors. And he comes out and talks about the secret treasure of Nefertiti, which is somewhere in this ground that is guarded by Makita Warriors, and brings out a metal detector to search for old junk while they're on their lunch break. He predicts that he'll find the Crystal Skull there while saying he's Indiana Jones, so hashtag predicted worst Indiana Jones movie ever. Also, he does like these voices of like an old man and I want to say a Creole chef that are joining him.
Yeah.
And they're bad. It's bad. It's very bad.
I actually the old man is one of the funnier parts early in the movie. Because when he's jabbering about Nefertiti's treasure, at one point it cuts him as the old man and he just goes, I remember Nefertiti drove a 57 Chevy. And I thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, these are worse. We didn't even really like the split personality bits in Scared Stupid, but these are worse, right?
Yeah, no, we voted the scared personality bits as like one of the worst parts of that movie. And this is worse than that. Because there's
lazier, they're less funny.
There's no audience but the audience.
Yeah, like
there's no rim shot. Sorry.
Well, yeah, so that's a big thing. There's no rim shot in this. His only friend in this is this professor character we'll get to later. But it's like, I didn't like the content of the split personality bit so much, but I did kind of enjoy them from a character perspective, because it was like, oh, like, this is Ernest, like, in his weird way, trying to, like, help and entertain his friends. Here, it's just kind of sad.
Yeah, and he's not really given a reason to do this at the beginning of the film. It's just like, he's doing a thing, and then later on it applies.
And so Yeah, so we talked about this Indiana Jones bit with the Makita Warriors, which is consistent throughout the movie. Anytime the construction workers show up, he calls them Makita Warriors. And it's really unclear to me if he's doing a bit, like, he's just pretending and playing pretend for himself, or if he's supposed to be, like, delusional. What's your take?
It really comes off like he's delusional.
Yeah, because it continues so much throughout, and there's no break on it. And, like, that's not really part of his character. He's supposed to be, I mean, he's, like, overconfident. He's delusional about, like, himself. But he's supposed to have somewhat of a grasp on reality.
And in addition to that, he's not, like, doing anything productive, I guess is the right word. Because, you know, when we've seen him before, and he's, like, you know, dealing with situations, and situations are getting a hold of him, it's because he's doing a job. You know, he's janitorizing the bank, or he is janitorizing a camp, or he's janitorizing a jail, what have you.
He's cleaning trash cans.
Or he's mopping trash cans. But this is like, he's like not working, because he's like, this isn't his job. His job is that he's a janitor at a university, and the only reason we know that is not from the movie, it's because we looked it up on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
And on top of that, he goes out to this construction site, waits for people to leave, does some, like, old coot out there with a metal detector, finding at, like, mostly trash, and then he destroys their construction site, because he's Ernest. But it's just, like, he's just kind of a menace. He's not doing his job, he's by himself, he's rambling to himself, and he's out there, like, just fucking shit up.
Yeah, this is far and away the least sympathetic take on Ernest we've seen so far. That is a really good point that, like, definitely articulates part of why I dislike this sequence so much. You're right. It's selfish. He's not trying to do, like, even when he was, like, when he was hurting the guy who's not Flea in the beginning of Saves Christmas, he was still doing his fucking job. This is nothing.
Exactly, and they don't even retroactively fix it. Because they could have easily, like, later on the show, in the movie, say, hey, Dr. Mellon, I was checking out that site that you told me not to check out because I thought it might be, you know, something out there like you said it would be. No, he doesn't even do that. It's just like, hey, coincidentally, while I was doing my crazy coot shit, I found this thing. What is it?
Yeah, so, like, the end of the sequence is he falls on his ass, and he finds this metal thing that's shaped like a boomerang, which turns out to be like an ID tag for a cannon. It's like a thing on a cannon that identifies, like, what number it is.
Yeah.
Or what regiment it's in. And that ends up being sort of like the plot launching kind of MacGuffin of the movie. I don't want to do too much of this, but can I say how, like, easily they could have rewritten this whole beginning to be better?
Absolutely.
He should have just been in the university cleaning. He constructs some kind of, like, he has, like, a crazy, like, homemade metal detector. You just give him, like, a crazy, like, the floor waxer or something, like some kind of, like, gadget he's made himself. Mm-hmm. And then, like, he knocks over something in the university, like an old, like, vase or barrel or something, and that breaks open and it has the ID thing in it.
See, that would also be kind of perfect because it would tie into the MacGuffin later on in this movie.
And he could be cleaning and pretending to be Indiana Jones at the same time. Like, you don't have to drop that.
Yeah, that's fine. Like, at least he's doing his job. You know, he can, like, get rid of his boredom on a job. We've seen that before, and that's fine.
Yeah. But yeah, like, that's a thing, one of the ways this movie is frustrating to me, is that it's the kind of movie that makes you want to fix it. Mm-hmm. At least for me. Where it's like almost every time I'm like, well, you could have just did this. That's like kind of what's going on here.
Yeah, I think you and I were thinking that the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So he destroys the construction site. Machinery goes wrong. He gets chased by a chainsaw, a nail gun, some malfunctioning equipment overall. He says his classic catchphrase, "They're going to blame me for all this." Which is, like,
awful, right? Unlikable.
Super unlikable, because, like, in this reference alone, like, when he says it in, like, Scared Stupid, it's fine, because it's like, oh no, why would they blame Ernest for something that's out of his control? But because it's Ernest, you know, they would blame him. So we kind of feel bad for him. But this is like, yeah, of course they're going to blame you, you dolt. You ruined their thing.
Yeah, you did it. It's your fault. Yeah, this is like that line. It's the same fucking line from Scared Stupid with totally the opposite effect.
Yeah, we hate him for that.
Ugh. Yeah.
And then we see Ernest get something that starts something in this movie where he gets a nail shot into his hat, and he takes his hat off and the nails are bent inwards. He said, "At least I hit the hard part." And then a door falls on him, and he gets the door knocker in his mouth, and that's where the boomerang comes in. And then he runs away screaming as he yells, "A saw did it, I just watched."
What does happen is he cranks up his crazy metal detector thing, and it sends out like an electric pulse, which animates the saw, and then we get basically the same sequence as the beginning of Goes to Jail, where the the filing cabinets are chasing him, except this time it's with a saw.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not as good.
No. I mean, it's also just not as good because, again, he did this to himself. It's like when he's just doing his job with the floor polisher and it goes haywire, it's like, aw, Ernest can't do his job. This sucks. I feel bad for him. Where it's like, oh, Ernest is getting karma for ruining a construction site.
Yeah, but also just like the beats of the saw chasing him are just not as funny as the beats of the filing cabinets chasing him. Like that sequence has some like the Looney Tunes stuff where they're like, he keeps looking at them and they're moving, and he's like trying to hide from them.
And like one of them is the leader.
Yeah, this is just like wacky chaos.
Mm-hmm. Chaos for chaos' sake.
Yeah, this is the most chaotic Ernest.
So then it cuts to him running up to the university where he's at his truck rambling for some reason, which made me think he was a groundskeeper, but no, I guess not. And then he runs up to his friend, Professor or Dr. Mellon, and shows him the boomerang to see if it's something, and then also rambles about how we need to keep this boomerang weapon away from great white sharks.
Yeah, he does like an Australian accent and jabbers about fighting sharks with a boomerang. It's like almost funny.
It's mostly just, again, keeping on this old coot vibe of like, okay, who would ever like withstand to talk to someone like this?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about Dr. Mellon now that we've introduced him?
Yeah. So before this, we cut to him at like a board of trustees meeting where he has this like history theory that he's proposing and he can't get approval to do further research on it. And let's just talk about what he looks like. To me, I thought he kind of looked like he could be Stephen Colbert's dad. But the movie clearly wanted him to be Rick Moranis.
They want him to be Rick Moranis so bad, and he is not good. He's not a good actor, at least in this. I looked. He's super Canadian. You can immediately tell he's Canadian from the way he talks. There's one part where he says the word doubt, and it's like dote, and you're like, this is, I believe, the first Ernest film to be filmed in Canada, and it's really Canadian. But yeah, he's knockoff Rick Moranis. He's nowhere near as likable or funny as a Rick Moranis, and he's just not a good actor. Oh, I was gonna say, I looked him up. He's like some kind of Canadian stand-up comedian.
Yeah,
he had like a show.
His name is Ron James.
That's an unfitting name for him, right?
100%.
Look, Ron James sounds like he would be like a bigger, more intimidating guy.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if he maybe gets some comedy out of that. But he's no good in this movie.
No, he is not, unfortunately, and that's another part of why this movie's bad. Sorry, Ron James.
He's
we're ripping on you, but you deserve it.
I'll say this for him: he's not phoning it in. He's just not very good.
No. So the plot is he can't get approval for his thing, and the board makes fun of him, and they're like, "Oh, this guy's a klutz. Careful with that book you borrowed. You don't want to ruin it up like you did last time." And we
immediately know what's going to happen to that book.
Yeah, it gets Ernest. It gets Ernest.
Ernest's all over
it. So when Ernest goes to show Dr. Mellon, I keep wanting to call him Professor. So apologies in advance for that. He shows Dr. Mellon.
You know what, Josh? It doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't. He shows Dr.
He's not real, and also he sucks.
Dr. Professor Mellon, the boomerang thing, and tests it out, and then it comes flying back at them into the book that he borrowed, and that book is just destroyed.
Yeah, that stressed me out. I don't like when books get destroyed. Especially because they were like, that's the university's book and it looks really old. Stressed me out.
It also had no, like, reference on the plot afterwards. It's just like, oh, hey, you have a book, be careful with it, and then it just gets destroyed, and then no one cares about the book anymore.
Yeah, you know what, you're right. That doesn't ever come back. There's no part where they need information from that book or something, and it's bad that Ernest destroyed it. That's got a little bit of sloppy writing there. What was I going to say something else about this? Oh, so his theory, which I referenced in the synopsis, is that I don't totally understand this, but I guess his theory is that the crown jewels of England that are in the Tower of London currently are fakes. The real ones were stolen during the Revolutionary War and were lost along with this enormous cannon called Goliath. Mm-hmm. And he thinks it's somewhere in the area around the university. But he doesn't have any hard proof, he just has the theory. And that's why Ernest giving him the boomerang thing is important.
Right. So he does make one friend during the meeting, seemingly. Dr. Radnor Glencliffe, who approaches him and is like, you might not be too crazy. Come see me later. I might be able to work something out with you. And then once Ernest and Mellon figure out that the boomerang is a thing and has numbers on it, they bring it to Dr. Glencliffe, who's like this collector of historical artifacts. He apparently has a mummy, a bunch of urns, Ben Franklin's kite, and some other stuff.
Yeah, he's a confusing character.
Mm-hmm.
He's like a medical doctor, right?
So, I mean, kind of. I assumed he was like a university doctor, like Professor Dr. Mellon, but I don't know.
I couldn't tell if he was supposed to be like a medical doctor who just donates to the university and has an antique collection, or if he was supposed to be like an archaeologist. It doesn't seem like it is, because he would be... At one point, he like makes his like goons, because he has goons, like crime goons. Mm-hmm. He makes them do research for him.
Yeah. So like, going back to like the whole Indiana Jones thing, like I could see the pieces of like what this movie's doing, because Dr. Radnor turns out to be evil. You know, go figure. And it's like, oh, this is the evil professor that wants to steal credit for Indiana Jones' work, and he's like the stand-in for the villain in like the first Indiana Jones, who turned to be like a Nazi. It's like,
Belloc.
You know. And then like this movie, Professor Mellon is supposed to be the stand-in for Indiana Jones himself, and then just
which doesn't work.
And then Ernest is short round, I guess.
I guess. Oh, he's kind of Marion.
You're right. No, he is Marion.
This movie's fucking weird. It doesn't know what it wants to be. I think you're right. It's just doing too much stuff, and none of it. It doesn't focus enough on anything. If they really wanted to focus in on like, because there's a good idea there, where it's like, this is the Indiana Jones riff, and it's like Ernest wants to be Indiana Jones. And he's friends with a guy who seems like the opposite of Indiana Jones. And then through their interaction and their adventure, Ernest essentially turns this guy into Indiana Jones. Like, that is a really good idea for like a comedy adventure movie, right? But they don't focus on that, and they don't really like do that arc cleanly. This like movie is just begging for a better script. I think that's the core of what's going on here.
For sure. I mean, I could see a version of this movie that succeeds, but this is, like, far and away from that.
Yeah.
So while they're at Dr. Glencliffe's area, Dr. Glencliffe confirms Mellon's theory and proves him going forward, but he needs, like, proof to actually, like, back him up. So he, like, sets Mellon on their way. Well, Ernest is in the background. I don't think there's a better way to say this, so I'm just going to say it. Violating a mummy.
Yeah, he just totally destroys this mummy. He pushes his hand through her. It's awful and upsetting.
The setup is he's, like, looking at her scarab necklace, and then he, like, touches it, and then her chest caves in, and then he, like, pushes his hand into the chest to get the necklace, and that doesn't work, and then the arm breaks off, and then he just ends up putting the arm in the chest cavity, and then just trying to hide it. all while saying, ew.
Yeah. And then they leave, and he gives a very confusing reference to the boulder rolling trap scene that's in Raiders, right?
Yeah.
And then, but like, because he's like, oh, me and Melon gotta get out of here before this mummy collapses, and then the mummy collapses.
Yeah. It's not the comedy it's intending to be.
How do you feel about Glencliff? Is that his name?
His name is Dr. Radnor Glencliff. Yes.
How do you feel about him as a villain?
He's adequate.
I think he is like... okay, so Saves Christmas doesn't really have a villain, per se.
His real name is Santos.
There's that guy, I guess. He's like a minor antagonist. But even counting him, I think Glencliff is the worst villain we've had.
Oh, for sure. I mean, out of all our villains, he's the worst. But it's also like, he's not like the worst in like a way that I could particularly outline. He's just
bland.
Yeah.
They really needed someone to like ham it up. The guy they cast is kind of just like a generic, like he seems like a guy who plays like a businessman in like an 80s movie. But I think they really needed someone to rise to the level of Ernest, which we got with the other villains like Nash and Trantor. Even the land developer in Goes to Camp, he's not, the guy playing him isn't being super hammy, but he's written as so cartoonishly evil that it works.
Right, and I think that's like what's missing. But also, going back to our theory that they wanted Rick Moranis for Professor Mellon, if they had the casting budget, I think it could really have benefited from like a Paul Bettany or like a Peter, what's his name? The guy who did RoboCop, but he was like a bad admiral in Star Trek. Peter Weller?
Peter Weller?
Peter Weller, or
wow, that would have been good.
Like that's like a Benedict Cumberbatch type of like, oh, there's a serious villain type of thing that's hamming it up.
Yeah. Actually, getting back to what I was saying about the Goes to Camp one, I want to correct what I was saying. He's not cartoonishly evil. The reason that character works is because he's portrayed as being like a very serious, like the villain from like a 70s action movie shows up and is playing off of the very cartoonish Ernest. And this guy's too much like halfway in between. But yeah, you're right. If they had cast someone like that who has a very serious vibe, or if they had cast someone that was more hammy, like they needed to go, I think with a lot of cases with stuff in this movie, they needed to go really hard in one direction or the other, and they don't, and it ends up falling flat.
For sure. So getting back to the plot, Ernest wants to go on an adventure to find this cannon and get more proof, and then Dr. Mellon's like, well, I don't know. And I have to do my job and go to school. And Ernest is like, nah, don't go to school. Don't do your job. Let's go on an adventure. We're a team. Laurel and Mellon. And he gets Mellon to agree.
Yeah, and again, like, Mellon's another case of this where he's, like, neither fish nor fowl. Like, this character, I think, either had to be, like, just a total, like, goofball, cartoon, absent-minded professor who genuinely likes Ernest, or he had to be the hater character to make this a more sort of traditional buddy story. But he's neither of those. He, like, kind of likes Ernest and kind of doesn't like Ernest, and it just doesn't work.
No, they failed to pick a direction yet again, and they can't have it both ways. But we do meet, a little bit before this, we see the professor go home to meet his flamboyant, materialistic wife named Nan, who is always dressed like an aerobics instructor.
I think, like, I don't know if it's always. I think the thing is, we just get her. She is waylaid on her way to the gym, so she spends the whole movie in, like, a spangly workout outfit.
Well, that's later. Like,
yeah, you're right.
This is when she comes home, and I guess she was coming home from the gym? I don't know. But
I don't know.
Either way, she talks about how his thing isn't coming through, and she should just stay away from Ernest, because Ernest is going to ruin his job, and she's 100% right. And that is, like, our kind of stand-in Ernest hater.
Yeah, but the problem with that is she never really interacts with Ernest.
She does a little bit towards the end, but not really.
And she doesn't really have any... The other thing with the other hater characters is they all, to some measure, have some sort of power over Ernest, which she doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, Poodle Smurf is his boss and the mayor and stuff like that, and she's just like his friend's mean wife. And she mostly gets siloed off into this subplot where she's chasing after Ernest and Mellon. She's played by Linda Cash, who will show up again in Ernest Goes to Africa. She's another Canadian actor. She's a little bit in the like Christopher Guest orbit. She's actually, a few years after this, is in Waiting for Guffman, which is one of my favorite movies.
And then she does Ernest Goes to Africa.
She's also she's the angel in the Philadelphia cream cheese ads. Do you remember those ads?
Yeah, those ads were crazy. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's her. She's got an interesting career. She's all right in this. I mean, I heard that the character she's given to play is not great.
No,
she does all right. She's better than the guy playing Mellon, but she doesn't. The material she's working with is really not anything special.
No. So, Ernest and Mellon take Mellon's car, which is also his wife's car, which actually may be just his wife's car.
It's just his wife's car, because she shows up, and one of her funnier parts is she sees the empty garage, and she's like, "It's my car, not our car. My car, not our car." Like, that bit's kind of good.
Yeah.
Just because she's, like, totally losing it at that point.
And then they take the car to the construction site and wait for the Makita Warriors to take their lunch break. And then Ernest is awful, because what happens next just makes me really not like him, and that's, like, saying a lot. Because, like, in most movies, he's, like, the best part of the movie.
Yeah, and we decided to do, like, 10 episodes of a podcast just about him?
Yeah. So, they, like, Professor Dr. Mellon's all like, "This is my wife's car, I gotta be careful, I gotta be safe, I gotta lock the doors, roll up your windows," all that stuff. And Ernest is, like, mocking him the entire time. Like, doing, like, the blah, blah, blah face, and, like, making, like, rolling eyes at the fact that he has to just fucking lock a door and close a window.
It's also, like, this is another one where this so easily could have been better, where it's like, instead of going blah, 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 they should have just had Ernest monologuing about, like, the spirit of adventure, and he's just talking over Mellon and can't hear what he's saying.
Exactly.
It's the exact same scene, accomplishes the exact same thing, but it makes him more likable and is more in character, honestly. Like, they're supposed to be friends. Why is he being such a dick to him?
Yeah, their friendship is weird. They have a weird friendship where, like, Ernest clearly thinks that Mellon is his friend, but also he's a dick to Mellon. Because the ongoing bit is that Mellon, like, has, like, said that he hates and wants Ernest to stop repeatedly, is, like, the "hey, what's that on your shirt" bit that he does to Mellon.
Can I make another suggestion to change this movie that I think would make it better?
Yeah, please.
And would fix the dynamic with the relationship? He shouldn't be a professor. He should be a student that is younger than Ernest.
Ooh, yeah, like the whole, like, Ernest hangs out with kids thing.
Yeah, except, like, instead of being a child, it's like a 19-year-old guy. Or maybe he's, like, in his 20s, and this is supposed to be, like, his thesis or something.
That would make Ernest the Indiana Jones and the kid short round.
Yeah, which I think would work better.
I agree, actually.
And it's like Indiana Jones, but he's like Indiana Jones, but his job at the university is janitor. Like, that's great. That's a great bit.
Yeah, it could be like a Good Will Hunting thing.
And then, like, yeah, there should be more of that, too, where it's like, part of it should be... I keep rewriting this movie now. Part of it should be, like, this guy is pitching this theory, and no one is backing him up except Ernest, and like, they point out, like, the only guy that supports you is the fucking janitor. And then you get the class struggle element that I think is kind of essential for these Ernest movies.
Yeah, but we don't get that, nor do we get Ernest having any ambition besides just him screaming adventure and doing an Indiana Jones accent.
Yeah.
And this leads to them, going to the estate building site, using a metal detector, and then also destroying it again. Ernest, at one point, has a door fall on him, I think the same door from earlier. And this is actually interesting, because it really throws a wrench in our ideas of Ernest, where Professor Mellon's like, "Are you okay? Ernest, are you dead?" And it's like, and Ernest says, "No, I'm okay. I'm pretty much just a cartoon character, so don't worry about me."
Yeah. Very weird bit of self-aware. Like, he just turns into Deadpool for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah. That really blindsided me.
It blindsided both of us. Because it's like, we haven't seen him have like a self-awareness about himself since camp, and that's been a frequent like topic of discussion where it's like, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Do we need that? And then this movie just casually like throws it at us, like, here's a fastball, and then never references it again.
Yeah, and the other strange thing about him in this one movie being like, I'm like a cartoon character, is like, part of, I think, what's wrong with this movie is there's not enough, like, Looney Tunes shit. Like, there's a point towards the end where the movie starts to pick up, because he starts doing more, like, Bugs Bunny-y bits. Mm-hmm. But they're, like, absent through most of this movie. He's just kind of a weird, clumsy dick for a lot of it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the next thing is, like, they find a cannonball, and they accidentally bring down the estate building site with a, like, bowling ball it with a cannonball, and they flee from the construction workers running after them. But it's not cartoony enough, because, again, it's just them destroying the same construction site and being dicks.
It's too realistic to not be upsetting. Like, these are working guys. Again, like, they really lose sight. The class consciousness is not on display here. Ernest has no class solidarity in this movie, and I don't like it.
No, he's a class traitor.
Yeah.
Because these construction guys are out there doing their jobs. Like, they could have easily made Ernest a construction guy, right? Like, he could have been, like, a part of the construction crew instead of, like, a janitor at this university, and then just teamed up with his friend at the university.
That's a really good point. That's totally would have been... Yeah, because he could have been just as easily... Like I said, he could have been cleaning and doing the Indiana Jones bit. He could have also just as easily been, like, doing construction work and doing the Indiana Jones bit and then accidentally fucking everything up.
Yeah, also, I mean, I don't think it's wrong. I don't think it's too much to say, like, you know, Ernest has a day job and a night job because he's Ernest, and he fucks up both of them and needs to make money. And so his day job is construction worker and his night job is janitor. We could do that. That's fine.
That would have been... Yeah, that works fine. That's totally clean.
Well, it won't be, because it's Ernest, but, you know.
Well, yeah, that's true.
He'll try.
That's a good point.
If it was Nash, it would get clean. Nash knows how to clean a floor.
Yeah, so they get the cannonball. That's, like, their proof, like, okay, the cannon is definitely in the area. And they figure out, like, which direction they have to go in by, like, calculating the trajectory of the cannonball from where it landed. And, like, the striations on the rock is a thing that Mellon says that somehow tells them where the cannon was fired from.
Right, and it's like 1,300 feet or something from where they're currently located. Which, for, like, the cannon size, actually kind of seems small.
Yeah, but also they launched the cannon at one point later in this movie, and the cannonball doesn't really go very far.
No, but it is also a huge cannonball. I think
this is true.
The cannonball is also kind of like a reference to Indiana Jones, like the Rock. Which is, I guess, fine. It's not, like, great, but, like, you can see it.
Yeah.
So they flee the construction workers, or Makita warriors, chasing after them, and throwing shit at them at the poor Nan's car. And Ernest has to convince Mellon that he needs to step on the gas and not do any safety driving, and throws the car forward and eventually crashes it into, like, a rock face or something. And then the car is just totaled.
Yeah. They do total the car.
And then a moment of, like, oh no, everything's bad and awful. Ernest gets distracted by a lizard that leads him into falling into a cave and finding the cannon.
Yeah. And then, like, their cannon's in this cave. And I can't remember. There's a part where it happens during the sequence where, like, fucking Mellon is skeptical about something, and it's, like, totally out of place. Do you remember this?
So the way I remember it is, like, they ditch the car, they're walking around, and Mellon's, like, saying, like, we're near the area where the cannon should be, we can't find it, this is stupid, I should just give up and go home. Ernest, why'd you make me do this, blah, blah, blah. And then Ernest falls into the cavern, and then he's like, are you okay? Did you find anything? And Ernest is like, nope, didn't find anything, after hitting his head on the cannon twice, because he's just not looking up.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, that's kind of a funny bit. But also in this sequence, when they're in the cavern talking about the cannon, Ernest is doing the split personality bit, and he does, like, a racist Indian accent, and that's awful.
Yeah, it, like, corresponds with a John Wayne impression. And he's just like doing it while he's making a point. It's like there's no like in between. He's just like constantly talking at Professor Dr. Mellon and saying like his bits while he's doing it. And it gave me like an epiphany of something like an influence that we really haven't really talked about for Ernest with regards to what it might have influenced later on, which I think like a lot of like Robin Williams stand up and like stuff that he's doing kind of reminisces back to like when Ernest was doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, it was funny because I had also been thinking about that totally unrelated to this movie earlier in the week. Was listening to a podcast and they brought up that Robin Williams thing. Like I was listening to something and they made a joke specifically about like, oh, what if Robin Williams played this character and like, oh, he would do like some shit where he'd be like, I'm Mahatma Gandhi, and I heard that and I was like, you know what? It's weird. We've never talked about the Robin Williams influence on Ernest. And then like this movie really brings it to the forefront. I think that's a thing that is increased over time as Robin Williams becomes more popular.
For sure.
Over the course of these movies getting made. But it's definitely there. I don't know. Yeah. I like Robin Williams. I don't like racist accents. That's a weak part of Robin Williams' work, and it's bad here, influencing Ernest.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's worse with Ernest because it's just blatantly bad.
But the thing with Robin Williams, when there's him doing it in his stand-up, obviously he's doing that stuff to entertain the audience. When they work it into his characters, like the genie, that character is doing it to joke around with the other characters of the movie. But then this, Ernest is just doing it for no reason.
Mm-hmm. It's just like a thing that he does. It's like he has like Tourette's, but with impressions.
He's got stand-up Tourette's.
So this leads to Ernest accidentally moving the cannon block, and then the cannon starts to roll, and then it does so for the rest of the movie, more or less.
This leads into a huge ongoing set piece where Ernest is stuck first in and then on the cannon as it rolls like for a really long time down the road. There's a car chase in this part. He crashes through like a fair. All sorts of stuff happens. And it's like pretty fun, I guess.
Well, hold on. I'm actually a little bit mistaken, so apologies. First, it rolls down the hill into Nan's car, and that totals her car. Then Ernest hops in the cannon, and he gets stuck. And they're trying to see if the crown jewels are in there, and he can't do it. And then he also accidentally knocks Mellon out with his feet. Also, Mellon puts him in the cannon in the weirdest possible, like, least effective way.
He boosts him up by, like, grabbing his feet and, like, lifting both feet independently and, like, levering him into the cannon. It looks really uncomfortable for both people involved. And I don't think it's, like, that's not his physical comedy chops. It's just awkwardly staged, I think.
Yeah. So at this point, I think we have to cut away from Ernest to really develop what's going on in the background, which won't take long. But the first is Dr. Radnor Glencliffe is doing further research under the disguise of Dr. Mellon with his goons, as you alluded to earlier, and they figure out somehow. Oh no, they go to the construction site, and the construction workers tell them where they were headed, and then they catch up with Ernest and the cannon. Also, the research for this cannon alerts London?
Yeah. That's where the spy thing comes in. This is one of the most underdeveloped parts of the movie. This does lead to the very minor payoff to the thing where they do the research using Mellon's name. It's such a minor payoff that I didn't even realize until just now talking about it that it was a payoff. Mm-hmm. But yes, they're basically, they dispatch some secret agents to intervene in this situation. I guess because there's this thing of, like, if somebody gets a hold of the crown, they can just become the King of England?
I think it's just more of a conspiracy of, like, we don't want people to know that the crown jewels that we have are fake.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
And the guy that they have in this role, it looks like if Kevin Corrigan and Harvey Keitel had a son. And there was this guy.
Yeah, that is not an inaccurate description of this dude.
And he eventually will show up later, but that like starts to happen in the background. And then also, door-to-door salesmen show up. And Nate, do you want to talk about these door-to-door salesmen? Because I feel like out of anyone between me and you on this podcast, you would have feelings about these door-to-door salesmen more than I would.
Yeah, this is... Okay, they are a portly gentleman and a skinny gentleman. They are not played by Gaylord Sartain or Bill Berg at all. Either of them. They're two completely new actors in this role. Yeah, this really kind of blows up our whole perception theory. One, I'm just bummed because it's neither of the guys that I like are here. Like, we established in talking about Scared Stupid that it's like the ideal configuration is to have Gaylord Sartain and Bill Berg, or Bill Berge, whatever his name actually is. And they are weaker, for the most part, when it's one separated from the other. Here, it's neither of them. They have more of a bit than, like, the Tulip Brothers did. Because they're, like, sleazy door-to-door salesmen, but it's, like, inconsistent. Sometimes they complete each other's sentences. Sometimes one of them just repeats the last word the other one said. They're, like, oscillating at levels of sinisterness throughout the film. Yeah, it's not... I don't love it. I don't love it.
No. So they get involved in the story because they're pestering Nan about vacuum equipment. And at one point, Nan sticks their thing in a door, and they actually do kind of like an okay bit where it's like their material that like sings this like dopey song as they pitch the vacuum equipment is stuck in the door, and they're like, and one of them's like, get it, and the other one's like, can't. The other one's like, get it, and the other one's like, can't. And they do it for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, the more absurd these guys get, the funnier they are, but they feel totally out of place in this movie.
You and I actually had a conversation about these guys, which I thought was interesting, because they're the kind of wacky like thing that pops up that feels more in place in like a Coen Brothers movie.
Yeah. Their bit, their whole tone, I feel like is at odds with Ernest. I mean, it's essentially, it really does feel like an entirely other movie is happening when you cut to them.
And like, at some point later on, they mentioned having guns and ammo in the trunk. And it was just like, why aren't these guys just showing up in Noah Hawley's Fargo at some point and then meeting an untimely end with the car blowing up?
Yeah, I would be totally down for that. I mean, these guys, like I said, they aren't bad. Some of their stuff is funny. It's just like, it just still kind of breaks my heart to see them walking in place of my boys.
For sure. So the reason I bring this up now is because this is where Nan steals their car to chase after Ernest and Mellon, and that ensues her joining the chase at some point with these guys. And these guys go with her in the hopes that they'll be able to sell her a vacuum.
And then in hopes of getting some or all of a cut of the jewels.
Yes. So that also happens eventually. So this leads to Ernest being stuck in the cannon, and then Dr. Glencliff pulling up and is like, all right, I'm evil now, so we're gonna take this cannon and cut Ernest out, like, actually, because we can't pull him out, and we're just gonna, like,
super horny for mutilating Ernest.
Yeah. And then they decide to take the cannon back to his secret lab that he has.
Yeah.
And then this starts the road chase. So,
yes.
While Ernest is stuck in the cannon, he sees a Mexican red-kneed tarantula and freaks out. And then he eventually gets himself unstuck and gets the cannon off of the car at some point. And Mellon was kidnapped by the goons of Dr. Glencliff, who has a guy that looks like it could have been a Stallone body double who's never named. So I'm going to call him Fallone.
Yeah. He's like the lost Stallone brother. The one they left at the Grand Canyon.
Fallone is driving Dr. Mellon, an unconscious Dr. Mellon, and every time we cut to them, we see Fallone's Confederate flag just lying in the back of his truck. And so it's just like a lot of shots of like, these guys are Confederates.
Yeah, I guess they're really just trying to drive home how... I mean, they don't need to do this because the characters already said they were going to literally cut Ernest in half, so like we know they're bad guys, but they do really hammer home like, yeah, they're also racist.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's like a Nazi parallel, but at the same time, it's like...
Yeah, I wonder if it's maybe also supposed to invoke like the Dukes of Hazzard, because the movie essentially becomes an extended car chase where one of the cars is a giant cannon for most of the runtime after that.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, Ernest gets out of the cannon, also gets run over by a car, and then is chased by... What's that?
I said multiple times.
Well, in this instance, once, and then later on, again, he will. Twice.
Mm-hmm.
He gets chased Ferris Bueller style across a lawn by some goons. At some point, he does a good bit where he hides as a chair. And then he does his famous Aunt Nelda disguise.
Yeah, Aunt Nelda makes a surprise return. He hides behind, like, a clothesline, which just so happens to have exactly all the right pieces he needs to do Aunt Nelda, including her inexplicable neck brace.
Yeah.
And then he pops out, and, you know, again, this is like some classic Bugs Bunny stuff. He's got a disguise. He uses it to get the drop on this goon and knock him out, right?
Yeah, he, like, distracts the goon by pointing at the goon's own gun and saying, "Is that a gun you got there?" And as the goon looks at his own gun, he knocks out the goon.
Yeah. So, we've seen Aunt Nelda, I think, in all of these movies except for Ghost of Camp, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she shows up in Ghost of Camp. And this was the first time upon viewing her where I thought to question... why does she have a neck brace on every time she shows up? And then this was the first time they ever directly referenced it. Before he takes off the rest of the Aunt Nelda costume, he takes off the neck brace and his neck goes all wobbly.
Yes, which is either a lot of character commitment or just nonsense.
Yeah. But this whole sequence, like this, with the this early part of the cannon sequence, because the cannon sequence is kind of split into two parts. Because he like gets off of it and gets back on at one point, right?
Right. So we're building up to that. So then he runs out in the middle of the road.
Gonna make a point. I was gonna say this early part of the cannon chase sequence has some of the best physical comedy in the movie.
Oh yeah.
There's like a part where he's hanging off the truck and they're like passing through a bunch of like traffic cones, and he's got to lift his butt up and down to avoid the traffic cones, and like that's pretty funny. There's some good stuff there.
Well, actually, that's what I was getting to.
Oh, is that later? Oh, okay. Well, I jumped the gun.
Yes, it's fine. So he gets hit by the car again because he runs out to catch up with Mellon and Falone in the Confederate car towing the cannon, and he gets hit by that car just immediately. Like he like goes out and is like, "Stop! I'm a person, you can't hit me." And then Falone just hits him.
Yeah, that part's funny. I like the part. But he's like completely unfazed by getting hit by the car.
No, he does like a Cape Fear thing where he just is on the car now. And Mellon gets up and he says he's trained in the Oriental discipline and tries to karate chop Falone. It doesn't work. He gets knocked out again. And then Falone tries to knock Ernest off the car with windshield wipers. And then at this point tries to give him a public work enema, self-described, with the cones that are on the road where he's trying to push Ernest's butt onto a cone.
Yeah, they're like, and they're like going up and down, and there's like this push and pull. It's a weird sequence, but I thought it was pretty funny.
No, that worked. And then it works also afterwards where Mellon decides to get out of the car and help Ernest, and then Ernest goes around the other side, pulls out Falone, and then there's just nobody driving the car.
And that's the point where I was like, you know who I'm missing? Rimshot. Yeah. How funny would it have been if Rimshot started driving the truck?
Exactly. So both Ernest and Mellon are on the back of the truck as no one drives it. They're getting shot at by the guy in the car behind them. I think it's Dr. Glencliff in the car behind them as the car that they're in is towing the cannon. And then Ernest pulls out the pin and jumps to the cannon. But Mellon can't because he's a wimp. Mm-hmm. And he says, "I can't jump that. It's like 13 feet. And Ernest is like, no time to be superstitious. And I thought that was a good bit.
Yeah. No, that's a good line. But yeah, and now, like, halfway through the movie, it becomes that Mellon's character, like, obstacle is that he's a scaredy cat who can't jump. Whereas previously his character obstacle was just that people didn't take him seriously.
Yes.
They just give him a whole new character arc, unrelated to the previous one, that he has to overcome.
For sure. Which is, not a great idea. I mean, it would have worked if they stuck with one or the other, but they couldn't. Both don't work.
Again, to rewrite the movie, like, it could have been unified where if part of the deal wasn't necessarily just that they didn't take him seriously with his theory, but rather that he was too afraid to present it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and then you could have had Ernest back him up, and it would have made them seem like better friends, and it would have all clicked together better. But they don't do that.
Yeah, and he could have confided in Dr. Glencliff as, like, a friend.
Yeah, and then it would have made him more of a nefarious villain, because he would have been a more palpable betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
Alas, 'tis not the case.
So the cannon, with Ernest on it, eventually rolls to a stop, and then starts to roll back into Radner's car, who does swerve out of the way, but then just does the whole rest of the movie where it's rolling forever. And then we get a weird cut to a mime.
Yeah, I like this. Like, this is where the movie starts to work more for me. I like the whole long cannon rolling, runaway chase sequence. Yeah, and they just hard cut to a mime to set up this, like, small fair, or maybe it's like a big birthday party? Unclear. That Ernest is about to roll through and destroy.
Yeah, and this mime is like an Ernest mime where he just, like, tries to do his thing and everybody's cutting him off and no one's paying attention to him.
Yeah.
And then Ernest magically comes through a pair of gates and then barrels through the fair.
Yeah, they cut to him and he's rolling towards the fair, and there is a totally intact fence directly behind him. And we were both like, how did he get there? Like, they really, it's fine. They don't need to I don't need them to have a map. They don't need to be Edgar Wright or whatever. But they really do not pay any attention to, like, establishing a clear geography for this chase sequence.
They do not. So, this leads to Ernest eventually rolling past Mellon's house. And there's a scene going on at Mellon's house. With the London agents showing up to talk to Nan and figure out what's going on. And then Nan thinks about it and she's like, yeah, this makes sense because my husband's theory is actually right and you wouldn't be here otherwise. Mm-hmm. And they're, like, confronting her, and then Ernest just goes by on the cannon.
Yeah. And then Mellon runs past them and then steals his neighbor's go-kart.
Mm-hmm. Which just is there. His neighbor just has a go-kart. It's not set up in any way, shape, or form.
This didn't bother me. They're in the South. Like, I can totally buy that his neighbors have, like, a go-kart or, like, a four-wheeler or something like that, just, like, hanging out in their yard that he can steal. It is funny to me, though, because it's like, this exact thing happens in the video for Froggy Fresh's Stolen Bikes 2. Or maybe the first one. But it's a similar thing where a character just runs, sees a go-kart on the side of the road, and gets in it and drives away.
Yeah. So, now the chase is on. Mellon's trying to catch up on the go-kart. Nan steals the car for the salesman and goes after them. The London agents are after them, and then Dr. Glencliff is after them as well. So everybody's after Ernest on the cannon, who's yelling, Starward, Leeward, Edward, anybody. Which, again, not a bad one-liner. And then the cannon gets on the open road, and there's this crazy scene happens, where we encounter two random RV drivers. Do you want to talk about that, Nate?
This scene is so weird. I do think it is one of the better parts of the movie. Yeah, so there's these two people in an RV, a man and a woman, and they see Ernest approaching in the distance, and at first the woman is convinced he's a UFO. Then he crashes the cannon, he's coming, like, at them. He crashes the cannon through the front of their RV. They're both unscathed. And then they start yelling, don't shoot! And they're like, this is one of those carjackings. Which is also really funny. And then they start trying to fight him off by, like, hooking him with a fishing rod. And so there's this whole sequence where he's stuck on the front of this RV and they're all rolling down the road. And, like, everything is sort of coming together. The like salesman and Nan show up, and the secret agents make like a roadblock, and Dr. Glenncliffe is chasing them, and the whole time this is happening, Ernest has like a fishing hook in his face, and they're trying to pull him off the cannon.
Yeah, and at one point they shoot him with a fire extinguisher too.
They do that. But yeah, and so this part is where I think Glenncliffe's dudes shoot out the tires on the salesman's car, and this leads to them splitting up with Nan.
Yeah, it also is where Ernest and Mellon team back up, because at a certain turn, the RV gets loose from the cannon, and Ernest, off-screen, gets a fishing line ripped out of his cheek, which is,
horrific.
Great comedy. And Mellon drives up to a nearby bridge where he can jump onto the cannon, and overcomes his fear and does it, and gets a 9.3 from Ernest.
Yeah, that's kind of a funny cartoon bit, because he has the cards with the score on them, but...
It's a Bugs Bunny thing. Yeah, that's good. But this is a scene, like you were saying, where Nan splits up from the dudes, this is weird. Because they are saying they can't drive with a broken, like, 2 tires. They can't change 2 tires that are on the back of their car. And then Nan hitches a ride with a truck, and they're like, what about our percentage? And she's like, what about it? And leaves them. And they're like, what should we do about this? I know, we should go to the university and do things there. And they're like, okay. And then they drive off in their car with 2 flat tires.
Yeah. Yeah, that whole sequence is sloppy, I think.
Yeah, it is. At some point, they also throw a smoke bomb at the London agents, who are also opening fire on the cannon, and Ernest and the salesman and Dr. Radner, which they're supposed to be the good guys, so that's weird.
There's also a lot of people trying to stop a runaway giant iron cannon by shooting bullets at it.
Like, what is that going to do? Is it going to make it stop?
Idea. They don't. None of them shoot Ernest though, which I guess is good.
Yeah. So they, go forward with it. Ernest and Mellon are on the cannon now, and they eventually get to a cliffside, and they do what I think is a good bit, but it does drag on a lot, where Mellon needs to scooch towards Ernest to stop the cannon from falling over, but he can't look. Mm-hmm. And then Ernest is trying to instruct him what a scooch is instead of a hop, and then Ernest does more hops to show him what a hop is, and then the cannon falls over. All the time yelling at Mellon that he looked. Yeah,
and they have like they have like a discussion about like what's a hop and what's a scooch, and you're hopping and scooching while looking. And that is, like, the kind of bit that would have fucking killed me as a kid. Like, when I was a kid, like, my favorite comedy bit was the you can't double stamp a triple stamp thing from Dumb and Dumber, and it's, like, it's a lot like that. So I was, like, one of those things where, like, it wasn't really making me laugh in the moment, but I was, like, enjoying how much Kid Nate would have lost his shit over that bit.
Yeah, it fits as, like, maybe it's not the funniest for us now as adults, but, in a kid's movie, it's good.
Yeah.
So the cannon falls down a cliff onto a road, onto just this open road that it falls onto. Again, just magically traveling throughout the countryside. And then finally rolls into a barn where it stops.
Yeah. And then they enjoy some corn on the cob boiled in a tin can.
Over a fire.
Yeah, and they have like a little bit of like a moment together. There's kind of a funny bit where Ernest gets the corn and it's too hot and he's trying to talk to Professor Mellon while trying to not reveal that he's burning his hand on hot corn. Yeah,
this is actually, I think, one of my favorite bits of the movie, where like he's holding the corn in one hand and then like shaking his other hand because it's too hot, and then just trading off. And then eventually he puts the corn in his mouth, and then his mouth is too hot. And then eventually puts a corn in his pocket, and you think that's the end of it. But then no, his pocket's too hot, and he throws it away.
Yeah, this is some of the better... I mean, this is like... We've said before, like... Varney's really good at this, like... this sort of, like, one-man slapstick shtick. Kind of like the Penn bit. And, yeah, like, this works. It's just silly. But yeah, I forget, like, what is accomplished in this barn scene? They have, like, a conversation, but I can't actually remember what the point of it is.
So it's like, Ernest is the one guy that believes in Melon, and Melon's overcome his fear by jumping on the cannon, and they're actually like, holy crap, we found the cannon. It's like a moment of, like, to breathe and be like, wow, we're doing things, and this is our luck. And then they're, like, forming a bond of friendship, and then Ernest does his, what's that on your shirt bit, and then he gets upset again, and then they hear a noise, and Melon uses Ernest's face as a gun.
Yeah, it's like, that's another good physical comedy bit where he's like holding his, he's like moving his head around, like pointing it in the various directions. Pretty good.
But again, wanting to rewrite this movie, it would have been great if Ernest attempted to eat some corn and then was used as a gun by Dr. Melon to shoot corn cobs at whatever he thought the intruding noise was.
Yeah, and again, like, he said he's a cartoon character, like, why not embrace that and go more cartoony?
Exactly. So then this leads to them getting on a tractor and taking the cannon out by hitching it to the tractor. But we find out that they stole it. They stole a tractor from a farmer guy who's yelling after them in waders and a pitchfork.
Yeah. Again,
We hate Ernest at this point.
Also, in the previous part where the cannon is rolling through, like, people's yards and stuff, it's heavily implied that he ran over a cat.
Yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah, don't love that. He also, I think, definitely kills the tarantula later.
I don't remember that. I think he just tosses it in the road.
Well, he fires the cannon, and the tarantula, I assume, is still in the cannon, right?
Oh, that would have been a good bit, where we zoom in on the cannonball and the tarantula's just on the cannonball.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, when it hits the car, we see, like, Dr. Radnor's trying to get up from the thing, but he's got a tarantula on him.
That'd be pretty good. When the tarantula first showed up, we're not going to rehash it here, but it did cause us to get into, like, a totally in-the-weeds discussion about the setting of this movie and why this particular tarantula is there, even though the obvious answer is just that, like, they didn't care and they just got a tarantula from whatever animal handler was around Vancouver. And also, can I briefly get on a soapbox and say that tarantulas are not creepy or icky. They are, in fact, cute, right? You agree with me?
Yeah. Tarantulas rule, they're harmless, they're adorable, and being the arachnid expert I am, I immediately identified it as a Mexican red knee tarantula and was just casually talking to you about, where is this thing set? Is it set in Texas?
Yeah, it's definitely, the tarantula's just out of place, because it's Revolutionary War. It has to be, like, I think we agreed that, like, the thing that makes the most sense of it is it being Virginia.
Yeah, but unlike Bryersville, Missouri, we never get a location for this Ernest movie.
Yeah.
So, getting back to the plot at hand, we're almost done. We promise. They get stopped at a roadblock where Radnor catches up to them, and Ernest does more John Wayne impressions, and then Ernest tries to convince Mellon to use the cannon on Radnor, claiming that he is always Davy Crockett and will always be Davy Crockett. Again, classic ranting phrases of, can't reason with the Mexican army, they don't even speak Bulgarian. And Goliath must speak. And eventually does use the cannon on Dr. Radnor.
But the Bulgarian thing, it's a good bit where he's like, we're like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid when they were in Bulgaria, and he's like, it's Bolivia, and he's like, well, you know, maybe they should have spoke Bulgarian, and then and then this is the part where the Goliath is kind of an interesting prop, because I didn't notice it until this part, but like the thing where the fuse is like a big metal face. It's kind of cool. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so they launch the cannon.
Ernest pulls a torch out of nowhere and launches the cannon. It's both like a physical like torch that you'd find in a cave, and also a welding torch.
Yeah, which he just has out of nowhere. Which again, like, inconsistent. Like, if part of the bit of Ernest in this movie was that he had access to like hammer space, that would be fine. But it doesn't come up at any point besides this.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the thing where he says, "I'm always Davy Crockett," is like a line that feels like it's a callback, except it isn't.
Yeah, it'd feel like that'd be more of a line that you'd see in Ernest Goes to Camp, where they'd set it up early, and then like that's like the ending.
Yeah.
So the cannonball hits Dr. Ragner's car. They go flying. Ernest is field gunner Worrell, which will eventually transition to Ernest in the army now.
Yeah, it's foreshadowing Ernest in the army.
And Mellon is upset by this and calls Ernest a buffoon and kind of gives up on him and leaves. And then Ernest has his... Oh, you know what? You know why he calls him buffoon? It's because the crown jewels aren't in the cannon.
Yeah, except the whole time that the cannon has been around, it's had barrels hanging off of it. And
On the front.
Yeah, very obvious. And at no point do they think to look in the barrels.
No, they do not. They're just like, it's in the cannon. And then it's not in the cannon. They're like, aw, there were none.
Yeah.
So Mellon storms off. Ernest is upset. He, back to being a lone wolf. They're no longer Ren and Stimpy and a bunch of other duos. And then he kicks the barrel out of sadness, and then he finds a holy hand grenade, and then a crown.
And of course he puts the crown on immediately, which, I would too. And it gets stuck on his head.
Yes. He does a sovereign accent, and Radnor gets caught up with him, and the crown's stuck, and they do this funny bit where they are trying to get the crown off Ernest's head, it's just not working. They use a wrench, they twist him, it is great hijinks, but that happens.
Ultimately, they decide they're going to cut the top of his head off.
Yep, back to this guy and cutting Ernest open.
That's what I mean. That's all he wants.
So this eventually transitions to Ernest going back to the secret lab that Dr. Glencliff has and getting tortured. But while that's happening, Abner catches up with his wife, and this is
weird,
confusing overall, as she berates Ernest for doing everything to him, and then he gets up and defends Ernest, and then he gets this courage and kisses Nan and dips her, quotes Elvis, and then just goes after Ernest.
Yeah, and then he proceeds to talk in an Elvis impression for the rest of the movie.
It's so weird.
It's also not set up at all.
No.
He doesn't. It's not like when they go to his lab or anything in the beginning of the movie. He doesn't have an Elvis poster on the wall, as far as I can remember, or anything. Also, the theme of the movie is Indiana Jones. Why does he turn into Elvis?
I don't know.
It weirdly, though, it does link into the thing where he's all about doing karate. Those parts go together. It's such a strange choice.
Because he gets to Radnor's office to find Ernest, because he somehow knows Ernest is there, and karate chops a security guard while quoting Elvis.
Yeah, his courage and his new Elvis persona suddenly make him better at karate.
And then Nan's following him. She also kicks the guard in as they go both up to meet with Dr. Radnor. And then while this is happening, Ernest is immortal again.
Yeah.
Because they try to cut his head open, and it doesn't work. It breaks the thing. And then Ernest eventually gets up and knocks out the goons with a chair. And then Radnor chases him into his office. And then the salesmen show up for some reason.
Totally inexplicable.
They knew to be there somehow. And it's at a point where Radnor has Ernest cornered. He's about to shoot Ernest. There's some sucking noise, and the gun and Radnor get sucked away into the super powerful vacuum.
Yeah, and this is okay. So the whole time this movie is happening with these salesman guys, I'm like, look, if they don't interact with Ernest, then it doesn't affect our perception theory, because as long as they don't interact with Ernest, we can just assume that had they interacted with them, he would have perceived them as Chuck and Bobby. But in this one sequence, they don't talk to each other, but the way it's staged, it's pretty clear that Ernest sees them, and they remain who they are. So, I don't know what to make of this whole thing. It's almost like they weren't thinking about any of this powerful mythology while they were making the Ernest movies. Is that possible?
I don't know. I mean, I'm at a loss for words with this whole experience.
There's no way that you and I care more about and are more invested in the continuity of Ernest than the people making the movies, right? That can't be true.
I mean, what else makes sense?
I mean, if that was the case, then we would be weird, obsessive nerds, and we're not, right? We're cool guys.
No, we're cool guys. I'm sipping a martini as we speak.
Yeah. So, I don't know. This is all baffling to me.
So, just to quickly finish this movie up, Ernest hides in Radnor's office in an Iron Maiden, and he can't. It does prick him, but it doesn't puncture him. So, again, immortality. And then Radnor picks up this ancient blunderbuss and destroys his own office as he tries to shoot Ernest. Ernest uses a blowgun, but almost swallows it and then spits it out at Radnor. And then he also gets caught in an elephant foot. Radnor nets him. He's about to axe him, and then Mellon shows up and uses the boomerang to save Ernest just in time. The London agents show up, and they're like, oh, we can't get the crown off. And it's like, well, I guess Ernest must be king. And then Abner makes the what's in your shirt joke and gets Ernest, and then the crown falls off. And then that's it. The movie ends. And then we just see a trailer for Back to School with Ernest just saying, hey, Vern, it's my new movie, Back to School. Isn't it weird that when you scratch your nails on a chalkboard, it makes this noise? And then that's just the whole fucking trailer.
I hate that. I love annoying shit. I love annoying characters. But I'm like, in that way, I am a total normie. I cannot fucking stand the sound of nails on a chalkboard. It creates like a full body revulsion in me. I feel like my skeleton is like doing barrel rolls inside of my skin.
I mean, that's the thing. They pretty much just like, hey, Jim Varney, here is a chalkboard, and we wrote on it, Ernest goes to school. I need you to do like a 2-second trailer where you're like, hey, Vern, I'm going back to school. And I don't know, just fucking do something with the chalkboard, I guess. You figure it out. And they just does the thing.
He weirdly, though, in this teaser seems more, like, amped up and locked in than he is in, like, the bulk of this movie. Did you feel that way?
Yeah, maybe him and John Cherry had a falling out, and maybe because John Cherry's not doing this movie. I looked it up. It's true. He's not. He's not doing Back to School. Coke Sam's does it.
Interesting.
Maybe Ernest is like, oh, now I could be Ernest again.
I don't know. I mean, we'll see. This movie, in a way, is kind of like Back to the Future 2, in that it ends with the trailer for the next movie.
Yep. And that is mostly it. There are a few things that we could talk about that stand out. But just to start off, Nate, how do you feel about this entire plot?
I didn't like it. It was bad.
Yeah,
it was a bad movie.
Bad and very forgettable.
Can we talk about the timeline? Because
let's do a cutaway to the timeline. So let's insert a noise here. And now, breaking news to Timeline Corner with our host, Nate Osterman. Nate, report to us on the timeline.
Okay, so refresher for people. The way the timeline stands currently is there's goes to camp, and then the timeline splits in two. With one timeline where Ernest succeeds and goes to camp, which is where Ernest goes to jail is currently located, and one timeline where Ernest fails and goes to camp, which is where Ernest Saves Christmas is. Ernest Scared Stupid, we've discussed, could fit either at the end of the failure timeline, and it essentially serves as Ernest's redemption, or it could fit at the beginning of all the timelines, taking place before goes to camp, because it's Ernest in his hometown. Either he starts in his hometown and moves out, or he returns to his hometown after failing. This movie is hard to place. It has the vibe, the tone, the style of Ernest that one would expect from a failure timeline movie. But he is maybe even more immortal, or more obviously immortal, in this movie than he has been in any yet, which would lead one to believe that it takes place in the Success timeline. At first, the first inkling of this is when he gets shot with a nail gun, and his head is unharmed, and he goes, they hit the hard part of my head. And at that moment, I had some measure of hope that this would still all make sense to me, because there is the part in Goes to Camp before he goes through the ritual where he gets hit on the head with the metal tray and it bends around his head. And I'm like, maybe Ernest's incredibly hard head is just a thing that he has that's separate from his magically induced immortality. But that goes completely out the window through the rest of this movie, where he's getting saws applied to his skull, he's getting hit by cars, he's going inside of spiked Iron Maidens and coming out unharmed. And I really just have no clue where to place this thing. I mean, logically, I guess you put it in the success timeline, but then it's like, why does he suck so much? And where is Rimshot? I don't know. Do you have any input on this, Josh? I know this is my pet project, the Unified Ernest timeline, but I'm at a loss here.
Well, we did touch upon a alternative theory where he goes through the ritual twice, where, without knowing, in Ernest Scared Stupid, he goes through the ritual by having the heart of a child and confronting Trantor. Do you think that maybe this movie is in the failure timeline post Scared Stupid?
I don't like it. It is inelegant from a narrative perspective, but I think that's the thing that makes the most sense.
Or do you think this movie is him pre-Scared Stupid, but post Saves Christmas?
That's a possibility. I wonder if maybe this... No, that has to be... Yeah, it's got to be one of those. I do think the thing that makes the most sense is the interpretation where the finale of Scared Stupid is a second shot at the ritual, and then this takes place after. But he should be less of a dick. But, I mean, we're going to ultimately have to make some sacrifices to fit this into the timeline.
Okay. Well, thank you, Nate Osterman. We appreciate your report here on Timeline Corner. And now we will fade away with more news sounds. Burr, burr, burr.
Wait. I have another idea, and this is overcomplicating things, which I know it's very out of character for me to do that. What if this is a fictional movie about Ernest that exists in the Ernest universe, and that's why he mentions being a cartoon character?
Ah, so it's a Super Mario 3 vibe.
Yeah. What if this is the Super Mario 3 of Ernest?
So, in this timeline, Ernest saves a town from Trantor, becomes world-famous Ernest, and they make a separate movie not about his actions in Briarsville, Missouri, but about him doing other shit.
Yes.
Seems suspect.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's just move on and stop dwelling.
Okay. More news noises. Moving on.
I'm crestfallen. My crest is completely fallen.
It's gonna get worse. So, before we get into the essentials, we need to talk a little bit more about the London agents. Because they're an element of this movie that does not work at all.
No.
Not only are they just like cutaways to like international stuff that just doesn't function, they're confusing in the way they show up to Nan's house, they ask about the cannon, they find Abner and Ernest on the cannon by satellite, stop him at a road stop and just shoot at them, and then show up at the end of the movie to just say, oh, Ernest might be king if we can't get the crown off. The hat's on the wrong cat, and then Ernest has the crown off, and then they're just there, and then the movie ends.
Yeah, they're totally superfluous. They don't, like you said, they don't really work. They like their setup ostensibly pays off, but not really in any sort of satisfying way. It seems like they're supposed to be like a safety mechanism, right? Like they should show up and save Ernest, but all they do is put him in more danger, and then just show up at the end and take the jewels.
Yeah. And then we have no ending for the salesman either. We didn't mention this, but I did want to bring it up. At one point when Nan was trying to take their car away from them, they're like, we won't let you unless you give us part of the jewels, and we will make Frank swallow the keys, Frank being the skinny one. And he's like, I'm real good at it. It's a party trick. Which was, again, like a real like Coen Brothers-esque thing.
Yeah, Frank is also, he's the sinister one. That guy's eyes are... there's a darkness in them.
Well, you know what he reminded me of? He reminded me of like a Billy Bob Thornton.
This is true. Yeah, totally. I could definitely see that.
And then at the end of the movie, they catch up and do the vacuum thing, but then they get knocked out by Dr. Glencliff, and that's it. That's the end of them. And then Nan's ending is that she's about to blame Ernest for everything that's happening, and then Abner's like, "Be cool, honey," in an Elvis accent, and then she's like all like tamed housewife now, and then that's it.
Yeah, no, that's bad too. That plot line doesn't really pay off either.
Yep. So that is the end for all the side characters, and none of them are great.
Can I just, a real quick aside that I just found out? The one guy from this duo, we will see him again in Ernest in the Army. He's also the guy who controls the de-evolution machine in the Super Mario Brothers movie.
Huh.
So, I don't know, there's that.
Okay. So let's move on and wrap this ugly present up in a nice bow, and talk about the essentials list.
Do you have the list up?
I have the list up. Let's just check it off. Hat and vest. Check.
He's got them.
Low status with ambition / class struggle.
No, well, low status for sure. I guess his ambition is to be an adventurer, but it's too vague. And he basically gets it immediately. Like, he goes, the plot of the movie is he goes on an adventure. So it really doesn't matter outside of, like, the first scene with him.
Yeah, it's like the movie in the beginning is like, oh, Ernest needs a promotion. Oh, Ernest gets the promotion. This is him dealing with the promotion. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this does underline that is definitely an essential. Because this movie is worse for not having it.
For sure. And it also underlines the class struggle part of the ambition. Because it's like, he can have ambitions about other things, but it just doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. He should be, like, we don't need to write this down in there, but I think it's clear that, like, part of the ambition thing needs to be that he wants to, like, advance, right?
Rise above his station.
Yeah, exactly.
He needs to be Hamilton in the play called Hamilton and take his shot.
Oh man, I can't stop imagining Ernest Hamilton now. What a weird image you've put in my head.
This is what my final pitch will be. It'll be Ernest Hamilton. You'll love it.
I think, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure we're going to get through this entire series of Ernest movies, and we will have escaped having to watch Ernest rap at any point.
Bummer.
Is it a bummer, or is it a blessing?
I mean, it's the best part of Shark Night when they rap out about the movie at the end.
I haven't seen Shark Night.
Oh, dude. Anyway, so the next thing I don't think happens is Craftsman.
No, not really in this. I mean, he has the crazy metal detector, but which I guess we can assume he built, but that's really it.
Yeah, and I think it was something that was missing. Because even when he crafts something that's insane, like mopping trash cans, at least it's there and it's funny.
Yeah. This is the most sort of, like, detached Ernest is from, like, a sense of place. We don't really see his home. We don't really get a feeling for him, like, existing in the world. And I think that, like, that's the Craftsman stuff often comes up as part of that, like, establishing, like, Ernest's situation and what his home is like, and we don't get any of that in this movie.
No, we don't even see him doing his job.
No. Not even for, like, a second.
Nope. We got folksy wisdom. I would check that. I think it's definitely less wisdom than earlier, but
yeah.
You know, he does say things occasionally that work.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is one of those ones where I think it's, like, maybe kind of there. I can't think of any specific example of it, but, like, it's also, it sort of underlines, like, why that's good, because it's, like, that is a funny bit of, like, Ernest trying to give people advice, and, like, he's just a doofball. Like, that's a funny bit. Could have stood to have more of that in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, the most we get is just him pushing someone who doesn't want to do something into doing something.
Yeah. And that's more like him giving pep talks and stuff than him trying to give, like, sage advice, which I think is much funnier.
So that's lacking, but, you know, it's still kind of there. I think it's still an essential. Catchphrases. He does his you. He does, you know what I mean. We don't really get his snicker in this one.
No, not really. He's not really. Even though he's more of a dick, he's less of a stinker.
which is needed. I think like he should be a stinker. Like his Bugs Bunny vibe works. So I'm keeping that in the essentials. Slapstick comedy. That happens.
Yeah, it's probably the best parts of this movie outside of the credits.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Gamera-esque. Friend to all children. Child at heart.
Not present at all.
No, I mean...
He's not mean to children like he was at that one part in Saves Christmas, because there's no children in this movie. But this is like not... Like, that vibe's not there. This isn't like a lovable, sort of magnanimous Ernest.
No, because the thing is, like, the adventure stuff could be child at heart, but it really just comes off as crazy old coot instead, because he's a dick.
Yeah, exactly.
And that doesn't work, so this movie has failed to produce that. Therefore, it's a worse movie because of it, and therefore it's an essential.
Mm-hmm.
Complicated relationship with animals and machines.
Oh, that's totally in this. Not the animals. I mean, a little bit. There's the lizard. There's the tarantula. But there is the whole sequence where he makes the. I mean, the cannon arguably is a machine scene. But there's also the part with the saw and whatnot. Yep. That's totally in this movie.
Incompetent / inept.
Well, for sure, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cartoon violence. Literally.
Yeah. Yes.
Literally, he's a cartoon, and there's violence.
Mm-hmm. This is maybe the most violent one. Outside of, like... I mean, I know Scared Stupid has, like, a sword fight. But, like, there's a lot of people, like, shooting at Ernest and trying to cut up his body.
Yeah. And now we get to the ultimate betrayal, in my mind, for this movie. Where I think the ultimate reason why this movie has failed beyond measure and could have been improved by... Ernest commits the cardinal sin of eating in this movie.
Yeah, we went on a roller coaster with this. So there's a part early on in the movie where they're examining the boomerang. I mean, it's not a boomerang, but but they're examining the boomerang.
It's used as a boomerang.
And Ernest is making a sandwich, and he accidentally puts some steel wool in it. And then he goes to put it in his mouth, and we get kind of like a lesser repeat of the pen bit. And the whole time we're watching this, like, on the edge of our seats, like, oh no, is he going to swallow? Is he going to swallow? Is he going to swallow? And then he, like, accidentally drinks some acid. Horrific. And then, like, spits it all out. And we're like, okay, so he didn't eat. So the bit is still alive. And then just, like, a few scenes later, it just cuts to Ernest eating a hoagie, and he just eats a sandwich before getting distracted by a lizard. But he definitely eats it.
Yep. He doesn't eat the corn later, but he does eat the sandwich.
This movie drove a giant cannon over all of our dreams. No Chuck and Bobby. The timeline is in shambles. Ernest is a dick. And he eats. Which, I don't know why you didn't jump on my suggestion that this is a fictional, in-universe fiction, because then we could just brush away the eating thing. But I think you and I both know at the end of the day that is a delusion. That we're going through the stages of grief, and that's denial.
I mean, I think the thing is, at the end of the day, that the reason this movie sucks is because of the cardinal sin it creates, and the worst cardinal sin ever, that drove this movie to the point of being beyond savable, is that he eats. And you just can't do that. You can't have him eat, and you fucked up this movie because you made him eat. And that's on you, John R. Cherry, you bastard.
Look, I don't necessarily know if I completely agree with you, but I agree with the spirit of what you're saying, and I support you standing in your truth.
Okay, so moving on before I start crying, we have easily bamboozled / distracted, and I think we definitely have that, especially with the whole lizard thing.
Yeah.
Now, supernatural element?
No, not at all in this movie. Really? No, there's not a one.
No, not a one.
Would this movie be better if it had a supernatural element?
Yes.
Can you imagine?
That's the thing about Indiana Jones movies. They have the supernatural element, and that's what makes it work. The Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, all that stuff. That works. The Kali Ma. And, like, this movie, who's doing an Indiana Jones riff, doesn't have the supernatural element. What's the deal?
Yeah. And can you imagine how much better... Like, now I'm pitching more improvements to this movie. Can you imagine if the third lead in this was the ghost of a Revolutionary War soldier who was Ernest's ancestor and is also played by Jim Varney.
Yeah, and that leads him to finding the canon?
Yeah.
Would have been great.
Yeah, you're right, though. Like, it fucks up the Ernest formula, and it fucks up the formula they're trying to emulate. It's a total foul move on all levels.
So, the argument for keeping supernatural element as an essential is there. We're moving on. Chaos is in here, but it's just, like, so lifeless.
Yeah, it's too much, to be honest.
Yeah. Ernest must suffer physically and emotionally, but ultimately triumph.
He suffers more physically than anything. He's doesn't go through a lot of emotional turmoil in this, and then, uncoincidentally, it's the least emotionally invested I've been in an Ernest movie so far.
Yeah, his low point is that he doesn't have a friend that he's mean to.
Yeah, no. So yeah,
No.
I think, again, this underlines, like, yes, this is absolutely essential, and the fact that this movie doesn't do it very well is a huge knock against this movie.
The next one is self-sacrifice, which is just non-existent.
No, not in this
again,
at all.
Ernest is a dick, so I think like it would have helped redeem him, and could have been useful.
They should have switched the roles at the end. Like, it would have made Ernest a lot more likable if he was coming to save Mellon.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they could have had a moment where Mellon becomes brave and he stands up for Ernest, then he gets put in danger, and then Ernest puts his life on the line to save his friend. Like, that's a much better resolution, I think.
For sure, instead of Mellon saving his dick friend.
Yeah.
Master of Disguise / Impressions.
I mean,
Tick.
Yeah, that's here.
It's not... The impressions are bad, but the Nelda was fine.
Yeah, this is like a pretty good Nelda. Not the best. The best Nelda, I think, is still the Ghost of Jail.
Oh, by far. And then we got to talk about Rimshot. Would Rimshot have made this movie better? The answer
Absolutely,
is...
100%.
Absolutely 100%. Yep.
I miss the little guy in this for sure.
This strengthens our argument for Rimshot being essential. Ernest has to hit rock bottom. Does he? No.
Kinda, not really.
Not
he loses
really.
his friend, sort of. He almost gets his head chopped open, but like he's the cartoon character. He's never in any real danger. Again, that's why it would have been better to put Mellon there, because Mellon is more believably in danger than Ernest ever is.
Yeah, and also, like, to rewrite this movie again, it could have been like, Ernest thinks Mellon is dead, and it's like, oh my god, I got my friend killed, I'm so upset. And then he finds out that Mellon is alive from, like, the London agents or whatever, and then he goes to save Mellon.
Mellon's alive!
And then lastly, the newest addition to the Essentials list is Ernest needs to have a hater, which he kind of does in Nan, but not really that much.
Yeah, this is another one where it's there, but it's not executed really well, which I think actually does strengthen the point. Like, Ernest needs to interact with his hater more directly, and they need to have some sort of power over him. And I feel like if those things had been true, again, the movie would have been better.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
So I think we had to go low, Nate. I think what this movie is telling us is that we had to have a movie where everything just sucks, where things are there but not really, where it commits all the cardinal sins, it ruins all of our theories, because we need to strengthen ourselves. We need to hit rock bottom. We, as Ernest scholars, need to rise above our station and use this movie as, like, this is why. Because if we don't go by these essentials, we get Ernest rides again. And we get crap.
This is a good illustration of, like, where not to go, of what to avoid. We like, the stakes are clearer now. Like, ultimately, despite the fact that this was a weak narrative, I think it definitely does strengthen our narrative going forward. So, in a way, I'm thankful. But also, this movie fucking sucked.
This is true. So, let's get into high and low points. So, you start us off, Nate. Do you want to do high or low, and what do you got?
I'll go high. I mean, the high point, I think, almost inarguably of this movie, is the opening credits and accompanying song.
Oh, 100%.
It's the best Ernest opening credits yet. The song is funny. The editing is funny. Like, his facial expression superimposed over these old-timey pictures is, like, a really good visual gag. It highlights, like, how good Jim Varney is at doing funny faces. I think it sucks that the movie peaks in the opening credits, but I think it's definitely the high point.
I agree with that. I had that as one of my high points as well. I also had a few other high points that just stick out. They're not as great. I think they're lesser points, but they're still enjoyable. And the first of those, I think you'd agree with me, is Jim Varney's corn bit of the corn's too hot.
Yeah. I like that bit.
The RV fishing line bit.
Solid. I mean, I like that whole... it's not like my favorite thing in the world, but I do think, like, we could even just put the whole cannon chase sequence as a high point. It's the most ambitious part of the movie from, like, a staging and directing standpoint. It's got a lot of the best physical comedy, aside from the hot corn.
Yeah. And then the part where he just gets the crown stuck on his head and the goons are trying to, like, twist and turn him to get it off, and it's just a good bit.
Yeah, it's a good bit.
So, did you have any other things to add for this? High points of the movie?
No, I think you pretty much covered everything.
Okay, well, what's your highest high point?
Of this movie?
Mm-hmm.
It's the opening credits.
I have to say the same. So, unfortunately, our current guest, Wheel Patrick Harris, please wait for it as we move on to low points and see if we need you.
This is hard because I really just don't like this movie. Like, it's not a good movie. A lot of it is bad. I mean, I think, like, the nadir of my enjoyment was when he does the racist accent.
Mm-hmm.
That was just, like... Because it was, like... Though these split personality bits have been bad throughout the movie, and then it's, like, also offensive. So it's like, we're returning to a thing I already didn't like, and now it's worse. So I think that's definitely the low point for me. I mean, also just, like I said, the lack of Chuck and Bobby, just the general dickishness of Ernest in this movie. There's a lot to dislike about this one.
For sure. For me, however, like, those are, like, they last, like, the Chuck and Bobby thing is just a cardinal sin in general. But the race impressions last, like, a second. But the big, like, overarching thing that I think lasted a while that really just made me not like this movie was the whole Makita Warriors bit, where Ernest is just
good point.
Ruining, like, a hard day's labor and becoming a class traitor by just destroying these poor construction workers' site twice through. And it just, like, made me not like Ernest. And, like, I feel like that was a real low point for the movie.
You know, I hate to do it to Wheel, but I think I agree with you.
And then, like, also just another low point, which is not as low as that point, is, you know, making Ernest king, like King Ernest, like, that's just, like, such a missed opportunity, right? Like, we could have had, like, the first half of this movie is, like, they find the crown jewels, and then it gets stuck to Ernest's head, and then he's king for a while. He should have been king for a while. You know?
Yeah, King Ernest would have been a blast. All we can really do now is just watch King Ralph and imagine what could have been.
See, I think King Ernest would have been legendary. You know what I mean? But I think we have to agree, and I'm sorry, Wheel Patrick Harris, but you still might have to wait for it, that, you know, the Makita Warriors thing is the worst low point.
Yeah. So how do these stack up to our overall high and low points?
Alright, well, let's look up what we got so far. So our overall high point is Ernest does a vaudeville scene with the pen in Ernest Goes to Jail. I think that's really great. I do think that it beats our current high point of the opening intro. While the intro itself is great, it's just a small part of the experience overall, and I think the vaudeville scene is more enjoyable. What do you think?
I agree. We keep agreeing. Zach's not here, and now this just becomes the agree fest again. Where two friends agree a lot about dumb movies. But it's like, I think another reason why that's such a good pick for the overall high point is, like, as funny as the Ernest P. Worrell song is, like, Ernest isn't in it. It's just pictures of his face and a guy singing. This is, like, a really good illustration of, like, why Ernest the character is funny and why Jim Varney is so good as the character. Like, I said, like, when we were talking about the corn thing, like, this is really one of his strengths, and this is, like, that pen thing is one of, like, the purest, cleanest illustrations of it. I think I said before, too, like, you could cut that out and show it to pretty much anybody. Regardless, like, you could show it to somebody from, like, an uncontacted tribe, and they would still probably think it's funny. It's, like, universally funny.
Yeah. Alright. So, again, sorry, wheel. Wait for it. Let's talk about low point. So our previous high low point is gratuitous threat of assault. Now,
God.
Is that better or worse than the Makita Warriors bit?
I think it's worse. I don't know. This is hard. I really don't know what angle to, like, analyze this from that's going to give me, like, a clean and clear answer. I guess, like, the Makita Warriors thing, I think just because the rest of this movie is so kind of crummy, it blends more into the sort of landscape of the film than that part does. Whereas, like, Ernest Goes to Jail, we were very high on. I think for both of us, right, it's the best one yet. Do you agree?
I mean, it's up there along with Goes to Camp.
Yeah. But it's like, that really stands out. Like, that's, like, a part that fucks up the movie for a little bit. Whereas, like, the movie is like, you could remove... If you removed the assault scene from Goes to Jail, it would drastically improve the movie. If you removed the Makita Warriors thing from Rides Again, the movie would still be bad, and wouldn't be that much better.
True. So I think we have to go with our original low point of gratuitous threat of assault and just once again agree.
God damn.
So apologies to Wheel Patrick Harris. It looks like we don't need you. We're sorry to have brought you on and not needed you, but maybe you kind of deserve it for portraying the world's worst predator / creep in How I Met Your Mother. So, sorry.
Yeah. But, you know, I mean, there's... You know, maybe we'll rethink your filmography. We'll remember how good you were in a series of unfortunate events. And maybe you could come back. Maybe we'll have a return of Wheel Patrick Harris. Who's to say?
Who's to say? But, you know, that's where we're at. So, I think we talked about it, but our next movie is what, Nate?
It is Ernest Goes to School. 1994's Ernest Goes to School.
Cue blackboard chalk screeching noises.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not. I will not commit that sin. I will not edit those in. I'm sorry, Josh.
We had to suffer. Everyone has to suffer.
No, I can't do it.
No, you're right. We should be martyrs and fall on that pin for society. Okay, so hopefully, you know, Goes to School will blow us away and not be the terrible trash that was Ernest Rides Again. Do you have anything else to add, Nate?
No, I'm just, I want everybody to pour one out for my homie Rimshot. And that's really all I got to say on this one.
Alright then, so thanks again, listeners, and until next time, remember, there's a right and wrong in the universe, and the distinction is not hard to make. You know what I mean?
All of you, Vern. But now you gotta move, Vern!